Hello and welcome back to A Moment of Focus, your go-to compliance podcast where we'll continue to bring you the latest and greatest compliance updates and available resources. I'm your host, Caleb Diaz. Now let's talk compliance. All right, well, we are back again with a brand new Cyber Roundup with Tom DeMeo from PKF O'Connor Davies. Tom, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, Kev. How you doing?
You know, I can't complain. I'm doing wonderful. Thank you. So, Tom, I read through the cyber roundups and my head was kind of left spinning a little bit. You know, there are so many different ways that we are vulnerable to cyber attack, and the numbers of cyber attacks just keep going up and up and up. I think kind of one of the biggest questions that, that we hear a lot from clients and advisors is, where do we begin in creating a comprehensive cybersecurity program? Can you offer us some perspective and guidance on that?
The way I always preface this for any firm, especially for an investment advisor, broker dealer, it's know your data, right, and value your data, right? When it comes to personal information, obviously this becomes a high risk component. And when you think about how you're going to structure yourself to really start to manage your cyber risk, whether it's personal data or just the fact of taking you down, the first thing you have to do is really understand where you're vulnerable, and that's where, kind of stepping back and doing I call a holistic review of people, process, technology, just to make sure that at each layer in that stack, you're doing everything you can within reason. Obviously you could throw a lot of money at this and still have issues, but there's a lot of good practical things you could do, but you have to kind of dissect those layers to really kind of figure out where you stand, so you kind of know where you go. And that's really where, an assessment is going to come into play to help orient, the business.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so important that firms figure out where their vulnerabilities lie. It was really interesting reading the Cyber Roundup and seeing that only 8% of the companies that had been affected by the SolarWinds breach, which was that major breach that happened at the end of 2020, early 2021, and I think we discussed it on an earlier podcast, only 8% of the firms that had been affected applied the security patch needed to fix that cyber breach, which is so low. Is that pretty common amongst firms that you've seen where they don't apply the security fixes right away?
Yeah. So, even for me, when I read that statistic, I kind of stepped back for a second because, something that was that high profile. I mean, the SolarWinds, every time you picked up the paper, it was blasted across the news. So it wasn't even something that was kind of, not known.
Yeah, this was a really big breach, and it affected a wide range of companies.
And the implications were tremendous, and you're talking some of the biggest companies in the world that, were impacted by this, Microsoft and so on, but I think to me, that really resonated with just how far we still have to go with really managing the cyber threat, because if only 8%, actually did something, there's a tremendous amount out there that still fully haven't grasped, how to effectively manage the cyber program, or, how to keep someone accountable that is responsible. So say, for example, again, I know a lot of the, your smaller investment advisors are going to work with a third party, IT provider, that they're potentially expecting to patch and do those types of things. When you start looking at statistics like this, there's a good chance that maybe they're not, but how do you know? And that's where I think the business has to start, really making sure that they understand the risk, whether it's at the chief compliance officer level, at the CEO level, so that, they're making they know how to ask the questions, right? Or they've built the structure within, to make sure that people are accountable, right? And that's where, we've been working with a lot of businesses and almost like this virtual CISO capacity to make sure that happens, right? To drive it through and to make sure that, one, the executives are aware, and two, the people that are operating the tasks, remain accountable.
Exactly. It just seems that it's so important to just stay aware of what's out there and what's going on and how these different events that occur in the news that seem like they're so far away can actually affect you and your business on a day-to-day basis.
You got to stay on top of it. It can't really be a back burner issue anymore. You need someone that has the capacity to just really stay on top of it. I mean, that's the only way you're going to stay ahead of it is by staying on top of it.
Precisely. And now I'm curious, have you seen throughout this pandemic people placing more of an emphasis on having more comprehensive cybersecurity programs and really just focusing a lot of their attention to that element of their business?
I think so. I think the
Yeah.
pandemic was a wake up call for a lot of businesses, because within, the flip of a switch, everything kind of transitioned to remote, and there was just such a tremendous emphasis on IT, to make sure that the business was sustained, to keep operations going, to keep people working, that, the executives really started to look and say, all right, are we prepared, or why weren't we prepared, or what do you mean we can't do this? You know, it really shifted focus to those areas, which I think is good because, it led to a lot of discussions that needed to happen. Are we adequately, equipped from a business continuity standpoint, or from an incident standpoint, and, have we managed the risk of what that means? So I think it's definitely moving in the right direction, but I think when you look at some of these statistics, it still has a long way to go.
Exactly. I think it's really important to realize that a cybersecurity program is not just something that you create and let it sit around. It's something that is kind of constantly evolving, and it's really important just to stay aware and have a hypersensitivity to everything that's out there and going on in the world, just to ensure that your data and your clients' data remain safe and out of the wrong hands. Now, Tom, it was so wonderful having you on today. Thank you again so much for your time and all your guidance and perspective that you have. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Caleb. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that is all for today's episode of A Moment of Focus. Make sure to like and subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, and check out our blog. We'll be sending out a link to Tom's Cyber Roundup along with this episode. And from all of us here at Focus One, have a great week and stay compliant.